Hello there, and welcome to The Value of Everything. So, I'm just going to do a little bit of a thought experiment on what if all the greatest musicians and vocalists, artists, all teleported through time and came to us right now and put on a massive blast and were artists living in this day and age and really churning out their music. It's sort of, I'm taking this idea a little bit from, I think there's some kind of old movies that have happened in the past where there's like a giant war that's occurring and all the greatest armies are traveling or teleporting through time to have this massive battle in some spots. And obviously you can see the extreme sort of the technological advancements of, say, like the American army versus, say, Genghis Khan's army or something like that. But just some kind of interesting things, and you can still see the determination of man and how, I guess, where you've got extremely technologically advanced artists, or not artists, war people, they can obviously smash up a lot of low-tech armies, but you may have some which have got a certain advancements, some who have still clawed onto some particular ways of how to treat a battlefield and how to flank your armies and things like that. And there could be some sort of scenarios that play out which, even though a army is a little bit more technologically advanced, is outsmarted by the culture or the knowledge that has been passed on and trained to a high degree of this more primitive army. So it's that kind of like little principle, and try to reapply it in terms of our greatest artists. Now, I do like a nice catchment of all the artists of the 20th century. I do actually even like that sort of like little trumpet playing music of the Roaring Twenties. I think that's a nice little joyous little tone of music, and I do like a few of the artists of that time. So I would say that I do have a fairly eclectic taste in music. But let's just try and do a few thought experiments on this in the first place. So, one thing we're just going to think of in terms of artists. Now, let's just say that we're going to be not just the ones of the 20th century, who are probably the freest artists that we've had, or the 21st century is probably getting a little bit, so in some ways there are some examples where we are getting a little bit less free up, and I'll give you some of those in a second. But in the past, there was a scenario where you were playing to the king or queen, and you were playing for the church or the priests or whatever religious sect you were. So there was throughout time, or you was playing to your tribe. In any sense, really, I guess you do play to an audience, but it is the freedom that you have to express yourself which does create the most beautiful array of music. And the more oppressed you are, the more that you have to kowtow to somebody's wishes, then the more that the art is diminished, and it just sounds a little bit crappy, and there is no evolution of the music, and it just stays static throughout time. So I guess what we could say is that, let's just say, for example, that we are bringing these individuals, so that these individuals have got something good about them. They've got some creative mind which is incredibly fertile and is able to absorb and be determined to master an instrument to do these things. So let's just say that we've grabbed them at that pre-point of where they're just about to write or sing their best works, and we bring them into this day. The next thing I would say is just say, let's see where the creative ideas come from. So I would say, like, in general, ideas derive from experience, pattern recognition, logic. I mentioned determination. And then another thing I just want to throw out there is I guess there's something that where we're tapping into the frontal right lobe of our brains. This is actually a part where people experience spiritualism and things like that. And there is a connection with creativity there as well. So I think there is some kind of adaptation there which can really make us pluck at ideas from this extensive intellect, which can be performed, this feeling of worldliness, I guess, that can be plucked from this creative part of our minds, which has been gifted to us through an act of evolution. So let's just say, right, these artists, they're in this day and age, what is going to happen to them? So the first things is, like a lot of kids right now, they might just be stifled with the amount of stuff out there, and there's too many things to enjoy, and they just don't bother. There's plenty of distractions. You can binge on Netflix and watch an entire TV series and kiss goodbye to your entire weekend without even mastering any instrument. You've got plenty of games. You've got endless toys and YouTube videos in which you can just kiss goodbye a lot of time. And a lot of those YouTube videos may not even probably provide you too much in return of providing you value. So there's that little element which is kind of a little bit problematic. Also, if they're in today's era, the record industry is well documented to be in decline. There's pros and cons to that. So I guess these guys would have to self-promote. They would have to be tech savvy and know how to do these tricky parts. Now, I guess if they can master instruments and master their voice and stuff like that, and have determination to do these things which require immense discipline, then obviously you would have to grow up with technology as well. Let's just give them the benefit of the doubt there as well, or they could find friends that could do this for them. That could be applied there. So they've got obviously the problem of the modern era where piracy and intellectual property has really just been a little bit murked. The water's been quite murky in those senses. You can put your art on YouTube now and things like that and get some kind of advertisement return. But the money, I guess, for the artists is in the live performance, which is kind of interesting, and it does play to the guys of the past, because they really, each one of them probably were live performers. Maybe where you get to the 80s, there's probably, you're starting to get a little bit less live performance-y, but anybody prior to that really would have to have worked out their art in a live scenario. So they have got probably some kind of great advantage in that sense. And one other thing that they're probably going to enjoy as well is that they've never had an opportunity to connect directly to their audience. So they can go onto Twitter, they can say something of what they feel. Imagine, I guess, Bob Dylan's still around now, but imagine in his times of thought and writing music, he could share some of his lyrics to his fans, and then they can come back and give him some different pathways of thinking. This is a very interesting time in terms of the freedom of information, but there is obviously crossroads at this point and how it is worked in the realms of the art of music. So I'm just going to put this one out here anyway. Music is, in essence, a barometer of freedom or oppression, and it does have its way of I guess having a cyclical manner of how it comes out. So you can oppress the people for so much time, and then the pendulum will swing in the other direction, and then it will burst out in another shape or form. Say if you think of the 80s punk era. So there is this little blossoming, this organic thing which flowers and wilts away in terms of different things, in terms of our oppression and our freedom. Now, one of the interesting times where you think of the massive flourishment of music and the industry is to do with, and it comes down to this weird thing called living standards. So if we think of World War II and how we had like the Americans and the industrialization of America all going into the war effort, and then the women going into the war effort, and then the men came back home. They had a massive workforce which returned, and the economy didn't fall to pieces. We just actually had incredible amounts of capacity to produce more stuff. And sorry, I'm not American, but I'm Western, if you could say that. And in those terms, you had this incredible extra capacity of money, and that money filtered down. So you had the two parents working, and it filtered down to the kids who had a little bit more pocket money, and they had money to express themselves away from the oppression of the lifestyle of what they lived in, and they could start to put money towards things like Little Richard, Chuck Berry, giving them some kind of ray of freedom, some kind of rebellion, Elvis Presley. All of these things could manifest itself. Some kind of freedom could emerge from this extra capacity of living standards which was created. Now, Industrial Revolution does create that for us. When we invent things which produce more with less energy, we do find ourselves creating more freedom for ourselves. And that's why it's a beautiful thing where you have different generations. This is probably the adolescent generation, which is really blossoming in throughout the 1950s, is expressing themselves into the 60s and the love era and things like that. That just started to go a little bit wayward a little bit, but then it went into the 70s and then the 80s after that. So there's interesting points in which finances and economies and the freedom of an economy can really change the way in which art and music is performed. There's another interesting part as well in terms of music, is that some songs are timeless. They are some philosophical points which are made in terms of love and life that are timeless, that can be shared from some person from 2,000 years ago to today. And there are some things which are really in the political frameworks at the moment. There are some kind of comical points which are quite funny now, but times have changed. People have changed their perspectives and views on life, and some music can become very dated. Now, the ones that I always suggest can be very dated very quickly are sort of comedy records, the ones that do take a little bit of a joke and are a little bit more politically motivated. They do get shelved much more rapidly, and when you listen to them nowadays, they just go, not quite sure really about this. But you do have some amazing love songs which do stand the test of time, and love is one of those things which have been written in the books since the ancient times, and even long before that. So there is interesting elements, and obviously you got to focus upon the melodies as well. Melodies do stand tests of time, and how the song was recorded in a particular way in the studio. If you think of Phil Spector's Wall of Sound, even though he is a murderous man, he did create a fantastic produced sound, which is really tricky. I don't think many artists have really managed to get that sound. I think maybe with like Amy Winehouse, she may have like used that sound a little bit, but beyond that, it doesn't. It's interesting how the production of a music and how it's mastered and how the vibrations hit the sound wave and go into your ear is an interesting thing. So technology evolves. Classical composers from the 1600s did actually push to create melodic music, which wouldn't have to depend so much on the singer, but more so on the composer, where the actual creative talent lies beneath. So it's interesting how that swing can happen and empower people in pushing themselves. It'd be interesting, obviously, if artists of those times were using the technology of today. I don't know if they're all going to be into writing dance music, but it'd be interesting to see twists and adaptations and their creative talent thrown into the mix in terms of that. Also, if you consider in terms of music, there is a blending, and this has happened throughout time, even back through all these Renaissance periods and things like that. There was a sense of visual arts, costume, and creating scenery with the music which was created, and you get that sort of thing with creating some really clever music videos. It is an expansion of our senses. This entertainment area is being pushed out into more senses than just our eyes or ears. It can be pushed out to many other things, our feelings. I've read recently there's more senses than just 5 senses. There's more internal senses where things like hunger and things like that happen. But it's interesting how our senses and interaction with our senses is going to be fully taken over if you think of how virtual reality and how we can adapt into a world, immerse ourselves into a world in the future, and how that art is going to twist around. It would be incredible to see how artists use that and adapt that in the future. So, now this is the thing, and this is one of the major questions in terms of these artists. And a lot of these artists are very political. They've got something to say. Some of them are just let's feel good and let's enjoy ourselves. Let's get ourselves out of this mood of oppression and find some beacon of light on the horizon. So, but one thing I would obviously highlight upon is that a lot of these artists may think to themselves, and depending on the mood of the music, what they would create, rather than say if they got out of the 1950s and they had a little bit of money to enjoy themselves, maybe they come into this era of today's political correctness, or what you would say, it's not really political correctness, which is like the George Orwell version where the government pushes it upon ourselves, but it's more the Aldous Huxley Brave New World version where everybody self-silences everybody else for talking out of turn, or things like fat shaming, all these kind of things. So maybe they might have things to have something to say in terms of our freedom of speech. Maybe this is more so on the government oppression side of things, where since 9/11 you can't go through one country to another without some heightened security, passport controls, eye retina scanning, things like that, massive queues, and scary people to talk to as you walk through. Maybe that is something that an angle that they could approach to that. And then also, just in essence, just the highlight of how our civil society has changed quite rapidly. No children really play on the streets, play games by themselves. All parents are always out with them in the parks, and they're always guided and watched and looked upon at all times, and never really given expansive freedoms to hang around in their little gangs and play around with their imagination. They're all just guided into playing their own, go to soccer games and really doing sort of pre-arranged sports rather than using their own creative talents to do their own ideas, use their own minds, and play games with their creative talents. And as you walk around this world, everyone is holding a mobile phone, looking at a mobile phone, talking on the mobile phone, or even going so far to have an iPad out. And very little people are interacting with each other than for social gatherings, but it's a really strange phenomenon which is occurring. It's interesting to see how all of these people, all these artists, if you think of Bob Marley, and if you think of Johnny Cash, what would they say? Frank Sinatra, even. You could say, even though he's like a little bit of a romantic and he can be a little bit about the swing of things, maybe the swing is gone, and maybe they take different darker tones. David Bowie would be interesting in terms of how his art would be shared. It's an interesting thing of how you could blend this art and how it would merge into a world of our modern society. And maybe that gives people some creative ideas to how to stretch themselves. So where you see a lot of artists today, every artist throughout time has taken some kind of idea from somebody else in the past, and then they're transferring it into the art form of today's modern era. And that's what gets applied today. So if you look at all the talented artists from the past, see what they think, and then reapply it to today's modern age, what do we get from that? It is a blending of a paint palette, and what kind of color gets created from the blending of, let's say, these moods, oppressions, or freedoms. So thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure as always, and I shall be back for more.